Alright, welcome. So today we're going to be building this chat app using React and Firebase. So on the right and left, I'm logged into two different accounts using the sign in with Google. So if you click log out over here, you can click sign in with Google, and then a pop-up window is going to show up and it's going to sign us in. Alright, and over here I'm just going to send a message. I'm going to hit enter to send, or I can click the send button. Automatically sends it on this side, and it scrolls me down, and on this side it automatically updates with the corresponding style. So for here I sent the message, so it shows it on the right side with a blue background, and on here I received the message, so it shows it with a white background. And I can send a message here, and it automatically updates over here as well. Now if we go over to the Firebase database, we can see that all these messages are actually stored inside the database. So this is updating to the database right when we send the message, and then we're getting it back from the database right after we send the message. So we send the message, update the database, then get it back. And you can deploy this to the web, and this is scalable. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our React app. So we are going to go inside Documents, and you can create this React app anywhere. And we're going to use npx create React app, and we're going to name this app FireChat. Alright, while that's being created, we're going to go over to Firebase. We're going to click go to console, and we are going to add project. We're going to call this project FireChat, and you can enable Google Analytics if you want, and we're going to select a default account for Firebase, and now it is creating our project called FireChat. Alright, now our Firebase project has been initialized and our React project has been initialized, so we are going to do code dot to open this up in Visual Studio Code. Alright, now we're going to run npm start, and we're going to delete all of our boilerplate code. So inside source, we do not need app.test.js, index.css, or these last three files. So all we need is index.js, app.js, and app.css. Alright, now those files are deleted, and we're going to go inside app.css, and we're just going to delete all of the code inside of there. And inside app.js, we're going to delete all of the code here, and we are just going to have a React fragment like this. So just an empty tag. And in index.js, we are going to delete report web vitals. We don't have index.css anymore, and we don't want react.strict mode. And in app.js, we are going to delete logo, since we already deleted that, and that is it. Alright, now the app is running, so we are going to go over to our Firebase, and we are going to click on this little HTML tag, and it has an alt of web. We're going to click on that, and we can call this whatever we want. I'm just going to call it FireChat. Click register app, and we are going to copy this key right here. So from API key all the way down to measurement ID, just copy all of this. And now we are going to create another file called firebase.js. So inside this file, we are going to import Firebase from Firebase, and if you haven't installed this yet, just do npm i Firebase. So over here, I'm going to do npm i Firebase, and we need one more dependency before we start, and that is going to be React Firebase hooks. So React Firebase hooks just makes it easier to work with Firebase inside React, and it kind of makes the linkage between them easier. So npm i Firebase and React Firebase hooks. Click enter. While that's installing, I'm going to finish our firebase.js. So inside here, we need to create a variable. And we're going to call this variable Firebase app. And we're going to set this variable to Firebase.initialize app. And initialize app is going to be an object where we're going to paste our key that we copied from before. So we're going to paste that into here. And basically, this variable Firebase app is how we're going to have access to our Firebase database. So from this variable, we can access the database and we can access the authentication, and that way we can log in and out and add messages. From this Firebase app, we are going to get something called Firestore. So if we go over here, we can see Firestore database. So that's the database we're going to be accessing. We're going to call this variable db for database, and we're going to get Firebase app.firestore. And under here, we're going to have another variable, which is going to be auth for authentication, and it's just going to be firebase.auth. And we're going to export these two variables so that we can use it all across our application. We could manually import these inside the app.js, but I kind of wanted to make it clean and have another file separate for it, so that whenever we need to access one of these variables, we can just import it. And I'm going to actually drag this into source. There we go. So I'm going to export db and auth. Alright, and now we're going to create a components folder. And these components are going to include sign in, chat, sign out, and a send message. So first we're just going to create the chat and the sign in. So sign in.js and chat.js. And we are going to run rfce. So these are ES6, ES7 snippets that you can download from the extensions tab in Visual Studio Code. Just download ES7 React snippets, and one of them is rfce, which does that. And we're going to run the same command in signin.js, so rfce. So in app.js, I want to import both of these, so I'm going to type in sign in, and automatic import should come up, so I'm just going to press tab, and it's going to automatically import it from up there. We'll do the same thing with chat. Automatic import. Alright, so the first thing we want to develop is the sign in. So we're going to go over to signin.js, and basically we want to create a button and an import. So for the button, we're going to be using Material UI, so I'm just going to download that right now. So npm I Material UI. And Material UI is just kind of like React Bootstrap. It's just a design library, and you can just import buttons and inputs, and everything's going to come already styled. So obviously Material UI isn't installed yet, but we're still going to type the code for it. So we're going to import a button from @material-ui/core, like that. And over here we are going to show that button. Like that. And this button is just going to say sign in with Google. So we're going to be using Google authentication to sign in. And speaking of that, we are going to go over to our Firebase database, so over here, and we're going to click authentication. So this authentication tab right here. We're going to click that, and we're going to click get started. And for Google, we are going to change this to enable. So we're going to edit configuration and click this switch to make it enable. So for the project support email, you're just going to use your default email address. And there we go, Google is enabled. So on this button, we're going to have an on click of sign in with Google. So this is a function we're just going to create. So up here, we are going to need to import Firebase so we can sign in. And inside this function, we need to set a variable called provider. So this is going to be that little pop-up window that you use to sign in. And we're going to set this to a new instance of Firebase.auth. So we're going to import auth and .google auth provider. And so we're going to import auth from firebase.js. So auth // actually. So we have to get out of the components folder and get into firebase.js. Alright. And over here we are going to do auth dot sign in with pop-up, and we're going to pass in our provider. And that's all there is to signing in. So now if we refresh this, if we save this and save app.js, so here we have the sign in with Google, and if we click this, we get the ability to sign in with our Google accounts. So now we're going to be using React Firebase hooks to check if we are signed in. So I'm going to import use auth state from React Firebase hooks, and we're going to set user to use auth state, and inside use auth state we are going to pass auth. So auth is going to be imported from firebase.js, so we can import auth from dot slash, just dot slash this time, firebase.js, like that. And we just pass in auth to this use auth state, and this hook is going to figure out, basically it's going to return a true or false value. So if we're logged in, user is going to return true. If we're not logged in, it's going to return false. So if user is true, then I want to show the chat, and if not, then show the sign in. So you can do a conditional render. So user, if user is true, then show the chat. Otherwise, show the sign in. And if we save this sign in with Google should disappear, and we have an error. So module not found, can't resolve React Firebase hooks. Oh, and the reason this error is occurring because I forgot to add /auth after the React Firebase hooks. So React Firebase hooks /auth. Save that, and let me just refresh this page, and there we go. Sign in with Google disappeared. That's how we know we are actually accessing the chat component. And just to prove that, I'm just going to show chat to the screen, and it should show chat right here. There we go. Now we know, now the app knows that we are signed in, since user is returning true. So now that we know we're signed in, we're going to start creating the chat. Actually, before we create the chat, I'm going to create the log out. So before I forget, actually we're going to call this sign out. And the sign out is very, very simple. All we need is a button, and we're going to have an on click. And the only thing we need for this button is an arrow function, which is going to run the function auth.signout, and that just signs us out. So it's very, very simple. Obviously we need to import auth, and we need to import the button from material UI, like that. And inside our chat.js we are going to show the logout. Actually, I'm going to show it at the top, or the sign out actually. And for some reason this thinks it's called sign out with a capital O. And in sign out it's actually /firebase.js, so // like that. Oh, and the reason this button isn't showing out is because I forgot to show it. So I forgot to add any text, so we're just going to say sign out. And there you go, we have the sign out button. We'll click this and it signs us out. Now we can sign in. And now we have full user authentication. So just an overview, we started at firebase.js. We took this key, so this project ID, this app ID, app API key, and all this other information that is unique just to our project that we created from before. So we copy pasted this from this project. This links firebase.js with this project that we created. Now we're accessing the database from the Firebase by accessing Firestore, so this database, firestore.database, and we're accessing the authentication tab, so this authentication tab by firebase.auth. We are exporting these two variables over in app.js, we are importing this auth and we are checking if we are signed in. If we're signed in, this use auth state is going to return true. If it returns false, that means we're not signed in and it's going to show sign in. If we go over to sign in just has a function called sign in with Google, and we are just accessing firebase.auth, so this auth over here, .google auth provider. So the Google auth provider is this Google auth provider right here. And then we're just going to do sign in with popup, auth.sign in with popup, so it's just going to show a little pop-up window. And then we run auth.sign in with popup, and we pass in the provider that we created. And to sign out, all it is just auth.signout. So a lot of this is being taken care of by Firebase in the backend, and this is just very, very simple. This is honestly the simplest authentication I've ever dealt with. And this just shows you how powerful Firebase is, that we can set up authentication in honestly just a few lines. Alright, so now we're going to start to add our messages. So over in Firebase, we are going to create our database. So we're going to click Firestore Database, and we are going to click Create Database. And you can choose your location. Alright, now our database is created. We're going to start a collection. We're going to call this collection messages. And we have to create an original document. So you could just click auto ID, set one of the fields to text, and set this value to, I don't know, whatever, it doesn't matter. And we can click save. And now we have the messages collection. So now we actually want to show this message in the chat.js. So we're going to remove this little chat, and now we're actually going to show all the messages. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a use state hook. So we're going to import use state. And over in chat, we're going to set a state of messages. And we're going to set this to a default value of an empty array. Alright, and now we're going to add the use effect. So the use effect runs once on when the page loads, and every single time after that, after one of the variables inside the use effect changes. So whenever one of the variables mentioned inside the use effect changes, inside the array, inside the use effect changes, then the whole use effect will run again. So that array I was talking about is this array here, and whatever values we pass into this, the use effect is going to update accordingly with this array. So if I pass in messages, whenever messages change, we're going to update the use effect. And we don't need to actually do that since Firebase has something called onSnapshot. So anyway, we are going to import db from Firebase. So like that, auto import db from /Firebase. And we're going to access the database. So over in firebase.js, we set a const of db, so this variable, .firebase.app, so accessing this app, .firestore, so we're accessing this firestore. And now we want to access the messages collection, and the way we do that is just .collection messages. So over here, we're just going to set db.collection messages, and we're going to order this. So we're going to order this array by the created at. So we're going to create a created at timestamp, and basically what this is going to do, it's going to put all the messages in order by which one was sent newest. So the newest message is going to show up at the bottom. And we're going to set a .limit, so we're going to limit the amount of messages taken in by this use effect to 50 messages. So let's just say there's thousands of messages inside this chat. You don't want to load all of them because that'd probably take like an hour before you can actually see your page. You just want to load the newest ones, so we're just going to load 50. And from here, we're going to use an event listener by Firebase called onSnapshot. So whenever something changes inside the messages collection, this onSnapshot is going to run. And onSnapshot, we're going to have an arrow function. Inside that arrow function, we are going to pass snapshot. So snapshot is just a snapshot of the data inside the collection. And we're going to set our messages array to whatever that snapshot is. So snapshot.docs.map. So we're getting into the document of the messages collection. We're getting to this document, and we're going to map out that all the documents in that collection. And for each doc, we just want to pass out its data. So doc.data. like that. And down here, we want to map out messages. So we're going to do messages dot map, and for each message, we're just going to return a div. Inside this div, there's just going to be an image and a paragraph tag. So the image is going to be the profile picture, and the paragraph tag is just going to be the text or the message that the person sent. So from here, we're going to destructure a few variables. So we're going to destructure ID, we are going to destructure text, and we are going to destructure photo URL. So we're going to pass these in later. So whenever a user sends their message, we're going to send the data, the photo URL, the text, and the ID is going to be automatically created by Firebase. So basically, the text is whatever text the user types in into the input. The photo URL is the profile picture of the Google account that they signed in with, and the ID is just the automatic ID, like this one over here. It's just going to be an automatic ID created by Firebase. So over here, we're going to have an image tag, and we're going to set the source to photo URL. And under the image tag, we are going to have the paragraph that's just going to have our text. And in this div, we have to pass a key, or else we're going to run into a warning. So key with a unique ID, so that's going to be the unique ID of the collection of the documents inside the collection. And I forgot to make this a self-closing tag over here. So for the sign out, I forgot to make this a self-closing tag. Alright, and the reason the message isn't showing up is because we forgot to change the permissions. So over in rules, I have to change if false to if true. So this is still in the Cloud Firestore. So we go over to Cloud Firestore, we click on our database, and we go to rules, and we change false to true. We're going to press publish, and the text shows up. And the image isn't showing up because, well, it's not even a field. We just have the created at in the text. We haven't created the photo URL field, but we're not going to need to, since the next step is to create a message. So we are going to create another component called send message, and we're going to run rfce, and inside the chat, under the messages.map, we're going to show the send message, and we're going to press tab here, so it's going to auto import it. So over here we have import send message from /send message, and we're going to create this. We're going to make this a self-closing tag. Alright, so at this point, the next thing we need to do is to actually create the form. So the form is going to have an input and a button. So that's going to have the input to type in the message and the button to send the message. Inside here, we're going to have a form. And we don't have an action right here for now. Inside this form, we're going to have an input. And this input, we're going to be getting it from Material UI. And same thing with the button. And the button is just going to say send. The input is going to have a placeholder of message ... And we're going to change this input into a controlled component. So whenever we type something in, it's going to be stored in state. And first thing we need to do is actually import the the use state hook. So we are going to const message that set message, and we're going to set this to use state, and we're going to set this to a default value of just an empty string, and we're going to set the value of this input to message and on change. So whenever we change the whenever there's an update in the input, so whenever someone types something into the input, we're going to run a function. So just a little arrow function over here, and that function is going to take a parameter of e for event, and we're just going to do event dot we're going to set message to event dot target dot value. So essentially, if you don't know how controlled components work, basically what's happening here is whenever you type into the input, we're running this function on change, and we're setting the message, so this message state, we're setting it to the value, and the value is message. So it's kind of creating two-way data binding between the input and the state, and now whenever we type something into the input, it's going to be stored in state. Our error here is because we haven't imported input and button from Material UI, so Alright, so now we have a controlled component. So if we go over to our React app over here, we have, it doesn't look like anything's happening, but what's actually happening is every single key press we have down, it's actually updating the message state with this text. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is create the send message function. So I want to have this button as a type of submit, so that way when we press enter, it's going to send the message. So we're going to set type equals submit, and we're going to set on submit to function called send message, like so. And we're going to create that function right now. So that function is going to be an asynchronous function, so we're going to have to add async before we call the function. And we're going to call this function, well, we already called it send message, and we need to pass in events, so we can do event.prevent default, so that way the page doesn't refresh when we press the button. And we're going to need to import db and auth from Firebase, firebase.js, I mean. So dot slash Firebase, and inside here we are going to destructure basically when we sign in with Google. So let me just save this so we can get that error. We're gonna get another error. Okay, let me just erase this. Alright, so basically when we sign in with Google, authentication from Google sends us some information. Actually sends us a lot of information, but out of the information that it does send us, we're only going to take two values from it, and that is the photo URL, which is the profile picture, and the user ID. So that's the unique user's ID. And we're going to destructure those from auth.currentUser. So we can run auth.currentUser to get the value back, to get some information back from our current user. So const user ID, photo URL. So we're going to auto import, actually we already imported auth, and we're going to do auth.currentUser. So that way we get this information back from our current user. And now we're going to do await. So await is just going to tell, basically asynchronous function means it's going to be running in the background, so it's not going to refresh the page, and it's not going to stop other messages from coming in as you're sending this message. But await kind of stops that, so it's going to tell the function to await, so to wait, so it's going to make this synchronous. And we're going to do db.collection, so we're going to access that collection called messages. And we're going to do add, so we're just going to do .add, and inside add we're going to have an object, and this object is just going to have all the values we want to pass. So one of those values is going to be text, and we're going to set text to message. Another one is going to be our photo URL. Another one is going to be our user ID. And lastly, we're going to have our created at field. So we're going to do firebase.firestore.fieldValue.server timestamp. So basically we're accessing the Firestore, and we're accessing the field value. We're accessing a field value from Firestore, and one of those field values is called server timestamp, and we can just get the server timestamp. So whenever we send this message, it's going to take the exact time that this message was sent from the millisecond, and that way we can tell which message was sent first. If, for example, two messages were sent at the same minute, it's going to order them correctly inside the array. And lastly, inside this function, we're just going to empty message. So after we send the message, after we press send and it sends the message to the database, we're just going to empty the input box so that the user can send another message if they want to. Now let's save this, and I have to import Firebase, and I'm going to sign in with Google, and now I'm going to send a message, show the moment of truth. And there we go, we get the message with my profile picture. We have the message. So now everything is working in this app except for one problem. It looks horrible. So to fix this, we're going to add all of our CSS. So this is probably going to be the hardest part. Honestly, Firebase and React is pretty simple. So I'm just going to be speeding this part up. But all the styles are in the description below in the GitHub repository. Although I'm just going to be adding all the class names right now and adding the styles. Some of the styles are inline styles, especially for inputs and buttons from Material UI, since you can't edit it from a different file. It has to be inline styles for the styling to actually work. So in the chat.js, the way I differentiate if a message is being sent or not is I actually destructured the user ID, so the UID, and in here I have a class name, and I have a default style of message, but I also have a differentiating style that differentiates if it's sent or received. So I have user ID. If the user ID is equal to auth.current user, so if the user ID of the user that's sending this message is equal to the current user that's logged in, so if you're the one who sent the message, then show a class of sent, otherwise show a class of received. And since we're using auth here for the first time, we actually have to import it. Also, we wrap this whole thing in one more div just so that each message gets its own line. So the way I did it is I used Flexbox, and for that to work, we have to wrap all of these messages in another div, and that way each message is going to get its own line. And we need to have another div wrapping around the messages. And that div is going to have a class of messages. So like that. So for the sign-in div, we also have some inline styles, and the same thing with the button. And for the logout or the sign out, we also have some inline styles for the div that wraps around the button and the button itself. And that should be everything. So now I'm just going to copy paste the app.css. So this is all the CSS code, which can be found in the description below. And if I save this, the web page should be styled, and we do have a bug here. Oh yeah, so for this message we don't actually have a URL. Oh, we don't have a photo URL, so I'm just going to delete that message. And now we have all the styles. So click send, it sends it. We do have a bug here. For some reason, when I send it, it's actually doing the received, and the reason for that is I forgot to do .user ID. So .uid, right after the auth.current user, you have to do .uid for the styles to be applied. And now they're styled as if someone else, as if I sent them. And if I sign out and sign in with a different account, these messages now look like they're sent by someone else, and I can send a message like and now it's styled here with the different profile pic. And one more thing is we're missing a feature. So when we sent a message, it doesn't automatically scroll down, and the way I did that is I added a dummy div right under the send message. So if we go to chat, right under the send message, I added a dummy div with, and I set a ref, so I'm going to use the use ref hook, and I set a ref or a reference, and I set this to scroll. So if I go import the use ref hook, basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scroll down to that dummy div. So over here at the top of this code, I'm going to do const scroll equals use ref, like that, and I'm going to pass scroll down into send message. Next, in send message, I'm going to destructure scroll using props, and I am going to, right under set message, I'm going to do scroll dot current dot scroll into view. We're going to set this to an object, and we're going to have a behavior of smooth, so it's a smooth scroll, not just an automatic one. And now when we send a message and we click send, it automatically scrolls down. Alright, I think that's everything, so that's it for this tutorial. If you guys enjoyed this, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.